On a seemingly ordinary day in November 1996, amidst the murky skies near New Delhi, two massive aircraft hurtled toward each other in a chilling dance of fate. A thunderous collision at 14,000 feet, obliterating tranquility and stitching grief across two nations. As metal buckled and lives vanished, the invisible chasm separating atmospheric layers tragically gave way to human error. Imagine a sky teeming with invisible corridors, dictating paths as uniformly as highways on land. Yet one oversight cleaved destiny from safety. How did the quiet hum of engines crescendo into one of aviation's deadliest disasters? And what breaking point caused these giant machines to fatally intersect? The secret entwined in these fleeting moments unveils a ripple of negligence and regulations ignored, altering history from the cockpit to the control tower. On the morning of November 12, 1996, the world witnessed a catastrophic event that would become a sobering reminder of the complex choreography required to maintain safety in the skies. It was a seemingly typical day for Kazakhstan Airlines and Saudi Arabian Airlines, each preparing for journeys that, in any other circumstance, would have spanned continents without incident. The Kazakhstan Airlines Ilyushin Il-76 was embarking on a cargo flight from Shymkent, Kazakhstan to New Delhi, a route that its crew was well acquainted with. Concurrently, Saudi Arabian Airlines Boeing 747 was commencing a flight from New Delhi to Dhahran, Saudi Arabia, carrying passengers and crew across the Arabian Sea. Both flights were slated for routine operation, but the skies they entered over Charkhi Dadri, India, would soon transform into an arena of unintended danger. The airspace around New Delhi had become a bustling hub, reflective of the increasing air traffic in the late 20th century. The rapid growth of global air travel had rendered certain air corridors perilously crowded. At ground level, the complexity was managed through air traffic control directives that dictated the movement and altitude separation of aircraft as they navigated the vast yet limited highway overhead. The pilots aboard both aircraft were experts in their fields, well-versed in aviation standards and procedures. They operated within a system dependent on precise communication and strict adherence to protocols. But this day's journey into India's congested skies would demand even more: a seamless execution of orders to maintain safe distances between aircraft sharing the sky. As they ascended and maneuvered, unseen were the layers of airspace regulations and invisible instructions taking effect, safeguarding against the unthinkable. Yet, against this backdrop of routine operation and trusted procedure, threads of vulnerability began to weave through the flights. Air traffic in the New Delhi region frequently operated near capacity, with air corridors stratified by altitude to accommodate the multitude of international flights converging upon the capital's Indira Gandhi International Airport. It was a high-stakes ballet where timing was essential, and the margin for error was minuscule. With their pre-flight checks completed, crew members on both aircraft relied on these understood safeguards as they settled into their routes. The pilots of the Ilyushin Il-76 expected that adherence to altitudinal instructions would guide them safely, while the Boeing 747, packed with passengers, entered its own ascent with structured precision. Each aircraft was a microcosm of careful engineering and human trust, individuals performing roles that collectively reached far beyond those seated within the metal walls. As the skies began to fill and routine communications marked the rhythm of travel, each flight appeared an unfettered success in the book of global aviation. However, the reality that morning was one of converging paths. Two routines unknowingly bent toward disaster under silent pressures mounting above the sparsely populated village of Charkhi Dadri. The genesis of this tragedy lay in these foundational hours, one where regulated paths and structured trails exist not as mere convention, but as imperative dictates of safety. As the aerial ballet unfolded against the open sky, a lapse, undetected and unchecked, would unravel the woven necessities of coordinates and communication essential in an overcrowded airspace. Moving forward, the intensifying congestion near New Delhi, a known hazard among those in the field of aviation, would spotlight inherent vulnerabilities. This looming backdrop pressed its weight on both flights, unwelcome and unrecognized until the moment pathways intertwined. forever altering lives and instigating lessons both painstakingly learned and desperately needed to ensure the safety of future skies. As the sun climbed over New Delhi on November 12, 1996, the skies bore a weight far beyond the cumulus crowns, an invisible burden inscribed by rising flight paths and converging destinies. This day, like many before it, illustrated the precarious dance performed over a region that had become one of the most densely trafficked airspaces in the world. The Indian capital's proximity to multiple international flight corridors made it a vital node in the web of global aviation. But this importance came tethered with significant challenges. The rapid growth of air travel in the late 20th century spurred an exponential increase in the number of flights transiting this region. Confined to prescribed corridors, shaped by international agreements and coordination with air traffic controllers, the skies above Charkhi Dadri offered limited room for maneuver. Thousands of feet below, in the control towers of Indira Gandhi International Airport, air traffic controllers orchestrated a complex symphony of routes and regulations. Their job was a high-stakes choreography, requiring split-second decisions to maintain order and safety amidst a swirl of variables. It was widely recognized within aviation circles that New Delhi's airspace was a known choke point. The convergence of commercial, cargo, and regional flights created a labyrinth through which pilots navigated with precision, but also with the mindfulness of the narrow margins that define safety from catastrophe. Several air traffic incidents over the years had underscored the urgent need for enhanced airspace management and improved communication systems to keep pace with the surge in aviation demand. However, the weight of these challenges was not always matched by advancements in infrastructure or regulatory measures, often leaving gaps perilously exposed. The congestion over New Delhi dictated a layer-cake arrangement of altitudinal separation. Planes stacked at different heights were directed by crucial instructions from air traffic control, who operated in real time to mitigate risks of airborne convergence. On the ground, a cadre of aviation experts coordinated this air dance with confidence hard-earned through experience and practice. Yet, beneath this apparent order resided layers of complexity that even the most robust systems struggled to manage flawlessly. This operational strain was compounded by technological constraints, radar coverage limitations, and linguistic barriers in pilot-controller communication that had long been topics of discussion, yet persisted due to systemic inertia. Such factors contributed significantly to a vulnerability that had not only been acknowledged but, tragically, occasionally manifested in near-miss incidents that served as warning shots across the industry. On this fateful November day, flights from Kazakhstan Airlines and Saudi Arabian Airlines entered this charged airspace, governed by parameters whose effectiveness hinged on strict adherence and seamless interaction between human and machine. The invisible corridors, so vital to the orderly functioning above the teeming metropolis below, were as fragile as the machinery and men who traversed them. As controllers in New Delhi issued instructions to both planes to maintain clear separation through designated altitudes, the next critical phase of this narrative unfolded. These directives were meant to guide pilots safely along their assigned layers, traditionally foolproof in ensuring airspace responsibilities were shared and respected. However, as the day stretched on, the fidelity of this airspace crucible would face an ultimate test, an intersecting moment where routine instructions would prove inadequate against an oversight that transformed potential energy into irreversible tragedy. In the unfolding narrative of November 12, 1996, as both the Kazakhstan Airlines Ilyushin Il-76 and the Saudi Arabian Airlines Boeing 747 traversed the skies, air traffic control's role became pivotal in navigating the narrow corridors over New Delhi. These controllers, ensconced in their booths within the bustling nerve center of Indira Gandhi International Airport, faced the formidable task of managing airspace that had grown increasingly congested. Their mission was to ensure that thousands of tons of aircraft machinery and human lives remained safely apart as they crossed and climbed through shared airspace without incident. Air traffic controllers issued a series of precise instructions aimed at maintaining altitude separation, a critical safeguard against mid-air collisions. The directives were clear, grounded in internationally recognized procedures designed to manage the flow of planes safely. Saudi Arabian Airlines Boeing 747 was assigned to climb to 14,000 feet as it departed to the northwest, while the Kazakhstan Airlines Ilyushin Il-76 was directed to remain at 15,000 feet, providing a buffer adequate to prevent any encroachment of their designated airspace layers. Communication between air traffic control and pilots, particularly those hailing from diverse linguistic backgrounds and trained in varying aviation cultures, is critical to effective adherence to these orders. In the case of the Ilyushin Il-76, the crew's working language was Russian, a factor that added complexity to communications. The difference in language proficiency sometimes posed challenges, potentially blurring the reception and execution of precise instructions handed down from the control tower. During this critical phase of the flights, the crews were responsible for executing their roles with meticulous precision. Flight decks buzzed with activity as pilots handled the sophisticated avionics that demanded strict vigilance, continually ensuring that navigational instruments and altitudinal settings aligned with control tower commands. In theory, these layers of technology and training were designed to make aviation one of the safest forms of travel, but they hinged crucially on absolute compliance with air traffic instructions. As both aircraft continued their ascent amidst the congestion above New Delhi, these instructions were not just operational requirements, they were lifelines. For Saudi Arabian Airlines, keeping to the climbing path into the sky was a straightforward task, facilitated by its advanced systems and experienced crew. However, unbeknownst to them, an unseen deviation emerged. Meanwhile, the Kazakhstan Airlines flight, operating under the assumption of communicated clarity, faced more subtle and insidious challenges posed by the potential misunderstanding or mismanagement of its altitude directive. The orchestration of flight, where radar blips translate to real-time decisions, stands atop layers of checks and balances, but the system's effectiveness ultimately relies on the unwavering execution of these plans. In this instance, however, a failure to maintain the critical altitude led to a deviation that sowed seeds of tragedy at 14,000 feet, where the destiny of these two flights entwined with devastating consequences. As the fateful convergence in the skies approached, the stage was set for a disastrous chain of events, irreversibly altering lives and leaving a profound impact on the aviation world. The tale of these flights would soon expand to explore the specific points of failure where regulations, communication, and human oversight collectively fell short, leading to the catastrophic mid-air collision that the world would come to know all too well. In the critical moments above Charkhi Dadri, the Kazakhstan Airlines Ilyushin Il-76 and its crew became unwitting participants in a fatal sequence that would sadly underscore the necessity of unwavering adherence to aviation protocols. As the aircraft moved through the dense New Delhi airspace, tasked with maintaining a buffer at 15,000 feet, the crew faced a whirlwind of inputs from their instruments, linguistic barriers, and procedural mandates amidst the sky's bustle. Yet, a critical lapse was soon to unfold, triggering the devastating descent that would seal their fate and that of many others. The Kazakhstan Airlines crew, skilled and competent, operated within a framework of global aviation standards that required rigorous compliance to altitude assignments communicated by air traffic control. However, a series of missteps, whether rooted in miscommunication, misunderstanding, or misjudgment, contributed to their aircraft descending below the designated altitude layer. This breach disrupted the meticulous orchestration of separation that serves as the backbone of aviation safety. Contributing to this tragedy was the oft-cited complexity of navigating international airspace, where pilots contend with multiple languages and potential operational discrepancies. The language of aviation is officially English, but varying proficiencies can lead to minor uncertainties in communication, which, amid the pressures of flight, can balloon into significant risks. On this fateful day, an apparent misunderstanding might have been magnified by the crew's non-native language capabilities, clouding the precision of directives from air traffic control. In the cockpit, decisions unfold rapidly, and as the Ilyushin Il-76 began an unauthorized descent, every second meant narrowing the safety margin initially woven into their flight path. Unbeknownst to the crew, Their reduced altitude placed them in the direct path of the Saudi Arabian Airlines Boeing 747. The Boeing's crew, under the impression that all adjacent layers were intact, according to air traffic instructions, continued along their authorized climb, unaware of the unfolding risk. The deviation into the 14,000-foot corridor, intended solely for the Boeing 747's trajectory, was an unintentional breach, but one with dire consequences. Even with advanced avionics and fail-safes designed to prevent such events, the mix of human error and procedural failure conspired to negate these protections. The airspace, an intricate dance of altitude and timing, stood afflicted by one unnoticed oversight, transforming redundancy into vulnerability. This critical error in altitude adherence was the catalyst that neutralized the safety nets orchestrated by the International Aviation System, leaving the Ilyushin Il-76 in perilous proximity to an ascending jumbo jet. Such a lapse demonstrated the real-world implications of theory clashing with practice, highlighting how swiftly the consequences of non-compliance could manifest into disaster. As the Ilyushin's descent continued, it brought the aircraft dangerously close to a juncture where time and altitude had converged unfavorably. This breach would soon culminate in an irreversible encounter as the Boeing assumed its projected path. Such variegated factors overwhelming a moment served as a harrowing lesson in the absolute necessity of compliance, a doctrine made all too apparent in the seconds that followed. The stage now hastened toward a tragic intersection where the Boeing 747, relying wholly on its clearance, was set to collide with the descending Kazakh plane. This critical juncture captured the very essence of unpredictable disorder intertwined with routine, a potent reminder of the vigilance aviation continuously demands. On that fateful day in November 1996, the sky above Charkhi Dadri held a deadly secret. The Saudi Arabian Airlines Boeing 747, a colossal aircraft filled with 312 passengers and crew, was following the prescribed ascent course laid out by air traffic control. It was a journey like countless others, a path dictated by clear communication, best practices, and absolute trust in the invisible architecture of safety that governed their flight from the moment the wheels left the runway of New Delhi's Indira Gandhi International Airport. Yet, in a cruel convergence that unfolded almost imperceptibly, a creeping shadow intruded their path. The Kazakhstan Airlines Ilyushin Il-76. Descending toward a lower-than-assigned altitude, this massive cargo plane inadvertently found itself crossing into the Boeing 747's trajectory. Unbeknownst to both flight crews, their fates had now intertwined in the worst possible manner. The Boeing 747, trusting its clearance, moved steadily and assuredly into this collision course. A stark reminder that, despite the advancements in aviation, human and systemic errors can orchestrate a tragic waltz in mere seconds. Eyewitness accounts from the ground would later describe the horror of seeing two giant metal birds collide, creating a fireball that lit up the sky, echoing dread and disbelief through local villages and beyond. The force of the collision was devastating, instantly tearing through the hulls of both aircraft. Wreckage spiraled from the sky, scattering across fields and farms, marking a scene of tragic devastation that was nearly unfathomable in scope. The enormity of this disaster became immediately apparent. Debris rained down over a wide radius, with the field of destruction extending to what felt like every corner of the horizon. For those on board the Saudi plane, seated and in their compartments, the impact meant an abruptly silenced flight, lives abruptly unseamed by an unseen threat. The passengers, a mix of Saudi nationals, expatriates, and pilgrims on a holy journey, perished in mere moments. Simultaneously, the Ilyushin Il-76, already compromised by its serious deviation in path, suffered catastrophic structural failure. The violent tearing of aerodynamics and altitudinal rupture sealed the fate of the 9 crew members aboard. For them, these final seconds offered no reprieve, only a descent into oblivion as metal and sky converged in unyielding force. The cumulative toll of this catastrophic impact amounted to the loss of 349 souls, marking it as one of the deadliest mid-air collisions in the history of aviation. This incident was not just a mechanical or procedural failure. It was a profound human tragedy, sending ripples of grief across two nations and the wider world. Families were shattered, communities in mourning, as efforts quickly shifted from rescue to recovery in the unfolding chaos below. In the hours and days following the crash, investigations began in earnest, as authorities sought answers to the questions echoing around the globe. How could such a travesty occur in an era of technological sophistication? Who or what might be held accountable for a lapse with such profound implications? With smoke still lingering on the horizon, a painstaking process of piecing together the fracture points commenced, aiming to explicate the sequence of oversights and errors that led to this disaster. The tragedy spurred an urgent reevaluation of air traffic control practices and international aviation protocols, setting in motion changes intended to restore the trust so cruelly shattered that day. In the tragic aftermath of the Charkhi Dadri collision, the magnitude of the disaster resonated deeply within the aviation community and far beyond, casting a long shadow over both the skies and those left grieving beneath them. The collision not only repaired the scars of airspace over New Delhi, but also charted a path marked by profound sorrow, as 349 lives were abruptly extinguished in one of history's deadliest mid-air collisions. This somber tally spoke volumes about the devastating consequences of lapses in aviation safety, resonating across continents and underscoring the inherent risks that accompany the miracle of flight. The human toll of the disaster was staggering, touching families from multiple nations and from all walks of life. On the Saudi Arabian Airlines Boeing 747, bound for Dhahran, passengers and crew abruptly found themselves thrust from routine travel into the annals of tragedy. Among them were pilgrims returning from Mecca and expatriates traveling for business or pleasure, each individual with a story and a future suddenly obliterated. The demographic represented an international tapestry abruptly torn asunder, leaving a legacy of loss profoundly felt across near and far shores. Meanwhile, the Kazakhstan Airlines Ilyushin Il-76 carried a smaller crew, yet faced no less dire a fate. The 9 souls aboard, wholly unprepared for the calamity that unfurled at 14,000 feet, became part of a narrative that spoke to the precariousness of human decisions amid a vast technological landscape. For their families, the crash ushered in an era defined by unanswered questions and the insurmountable grief of lives suspended in tragic finality. As the sirens wailed and first responders converged on the crash site, an entire machinery of inquiry was set into motion, driven by the need to understand what had transpired, piece together the harrowing final moments of these flights, and apply the hard lessons learned to prevent recurrence. Indian authorities, along with international aviation experts, initiated thorough investigations that delved deep into the mechanics of air traffic control systems, flight deck procedures, and the nuanced dynamics of international airspace communication. They scrutinized cockpit voice recordings and flight data from the black boxes, seeking clarity amidst the chaos, a step-by-step reconstruction of events that transcended the cockpit and rippled through the very framework of aviation protocol. Technical examinations of the wreckage complemented human assessments, searching for the specific punctuations where critical safeguards failed. Central to the inquiry was an examination of the procedures and communications that tethered flights to their prescribed safety zones. Questions persisted about the altitude miscommunication that facilitated this tragedy and whether there was a momentary lapse in air traffic control oversight or an irreversible error in the interpretation of navigation directives. The outcome of these investigations was far-reaching, ultimately characterizing the disaster not just as a catalyst for change, but as a poignant testament to the weight of responsibility held by those who guide our journeys through the troposphere. The uncovering of procedural gaps, compounded by the human factors at play, prompted a call to action for the aviation industry, highlighting the need for improved pilot training programs, language proficiency standards, and the enhancement of technological aids to bolster situational awareness and accuracy in crowded airspaces. With the memories of those lost urging a clear path forward, these revelations gave rise to meaningful advancements in global aviation practices, reforms implemented to bridge gaps that had too long been underestimated or overlooked. This ongoing effort to improve the safety of our skies serves as an enduring monument to the lives claimed by the Charkhi Dadri mid-air collision, etching lessons learned in the skies where life, trust, and technology must seamlessly coalesce. The narrative now shifts to how these lessons gain traction worldwide, influencing policy changes and renewing commitments to safety and accountability in aviation. In the immediate wake of the Charkhi Dadri disaster, the investigation process unfurled with urgency and precision, spearheaded by Indian aviation authorities who were joined by international experts. The task at hand was formidable: to dissect an aerial puzzle where remnants of metal and technology whispered clues that might explain how a routine day in aviation morphed into an unprecedented calamity. The aim was to unravel the causes rooted beneath the stark face of tragedy, focusing on key areas like pilot communication and the fidelity of air traffic instructions. Investigators methodically concentrated on the communication protocols between the air traffic controllers at Indira Gandhi International Airport and the pilots of both the Kazakhstan Airlines Ilyushin Il-76 and the Saudi Arabian Airlines Boeing 747. They parsed through hours of voice recordings from the cockpits, replaying the final exchanges that had occurred during those crucial minutes leading up to the collision. These recordings became more than just technical data. They were testimonies that captured the pulse of decision-making under pressure, wrought with the uncertainties and rapid-fire responses that governed those moments. Central to the findings was the communication barrier faced by the Kazakh crew, whose comprehension of English, aviation's lingua franca, was limited. This obstacle played a significant role in the misinterpretation or omission of crucial altitude directives. The linguistic challenges put a spotlight on an often overlooked fissure in global aviation practices, underscoring the urgent need for standardized proficiency in English among international flight crews. Moreover, these voice recordings revealed the pressures faced by air traffic controllers, tasked with the unenviable balance of managing congested aerial corridors while maintaining seamless, effective dialogue with pilots navigating the Delhi airspace maze. Simultaneously, the execution of air traffic instructions came under rigorous review. Analysis indicated that the Kazakh pilot's dissent was, in part, a result of incorrect execution of these instructions, an unexpected deviation precipitated by possible misunderstandings or lapses in adhering to assigned altitudes. This raised broader questions about how technological aids, like traffic collision avoidance systems, TCS, which were absent on the Kazakhstan aircraft, might have offered a critical buffer in translating directives into actions that ensured safety. The investigation also highlighted systemic issues in supervisory roles within the control tower. The reliance on manual coordination, while supported by radar, was intrinsic to the operations, yet gaps were apparent in the real-time oversight necessary to catch deviations before they culminated in catastrophe. By piecing together the intricate latticework of technology, communication, and human action, the probe aimed to pinpoint these failure junctures with precision, transforming isolated errors into global lessons. Through this lens, the tragedy at Charkhi Dadri catalyzed an industry-wide call to reform. Indian authorities, driven by the imperative to prevent such a disaster's recurrence, led the charge in national air safety enhancements. This included recommendations to revamp English proficiency testing for foreign crews, integrate advanced avionics systems like TCAS across fleets, and streamline air traffic control procedures to reinforce and adapt to the complexities of modern aviation. This painstaking investigation didn't just serve as a response to a disaster. It endeavored to turn hindsight into foresight, crafting policies to bolster safety and minimize human errors in high-stakes environments. The ripples of these findings compelled other nations to re-examine and bolster their aviation safety protocols, emphasizing the importance of proactive measures to mitigate risks. As these worldwide reforms took shape, the conversation now turns to the practical implementation of such measures across varying national landscapes and their effectiveness in ensuring the skies remain a domain of safety and trust.